Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1879, when Thomas Hargrove, a researcher from Boston University, arrived in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. His intention was simple: document the burgeoning mining town for a comprehensive study on Western expansion. What he discovered instead would never see publication. His field notes, discovered in 1962 during the renovation of the university's archives, paint a disturbing picture of the frontier's most famous family, the Earps, a family whose legendary status in American folklore conceals something far more sinister. Thomas initially took residence at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, documenting the town's rapid expansion. His notes describe Tombstone as a place where men come to be forgotten. The dusty streets were lined with saloons and brothels, the constant sound of mining operations creating an incessant backdrop. It was here that Thomas first encountered Wyatt Earp and his brothers. His initial impressions were unremarkable: lawmen maintaining order in a chaotic frontier town. But it was what happened on October 17, 1879, that began to unravel a darker narrative. On that evening, Thomas witnessed Wyatt and Morgan Earp escorting a man whose face was obscured toward the edge of town. In his journal, Thomas wrote, "The man walked of his own accord, yet something in his gait suggested reluctance. I observed them disappear behind Fly's photography studio. Only the Earp brothers returned." This observation might have been forgotten had Thomas not encountered the wife of the missing man 3 days later, posting notices about her husband's disappearance. According to town records, no official report was ever filed. The woman, identified in Thomas's notes as Sarah Colton, appeared distressed but resigned. When Thomas approached her with questions about her husband, she initially seemed eager to speak, but glanced over Thomas's shoulder and abruptly changed her demeanor. Thomas turned to find Morgan Earp watching from across the street. When he looked back, Mrs. Colton was hurrying away. Later that day, the missing person notices had been removed from every post and storefront in Tombstone. Thomas's academic curiosity was piqued. He began recording the comings and goings at the Earp residence, a modest house on Fremont Street that was shared by Wyatt, his common-law wife, Josephine Marcus, and periodically his brothers when they were in town. His notes detail unusual patterns: late-night gatherings where men would arrive singly, then depart together in groups of 3 or 4, always including at least one Earp brother. They would return before dawn, often carrying burlap sacks or wooden crates. Thomas observed that following these nights, the brothers appeared unusually vigorous, as though infused with unnatural energy. As winter approached, Thomas noted a pattern. He documented 3 more instances of men being escorted out of town by the Earps, always at night, always returning alone. Each time, inquiries would circulate briefly before dissipating into nothing more than whispered rumors. The town marshal, Virgil Earp, dismissed all questions, attributing the disappearances to men simply moving on to new prospects. The town seemed to accept this explanation without question. Thomas noted, "There exists in Tombstone a peculiar reluctance to question the Earp brothers' authority. Even Deputy Sheriff Behan, who holds no love for the family, maintains silence on these matters." Thomas began investigating the backgrounds of the missing men. Through careful inquiries at the land office and local saloons, he discovered they shared certain traits. All were unmarried or separated from distant families. All had recently arrived in Tombstone, and most significantly, all had made minor mining claims in the hills east of town, claims that were subsequently transferred to various Earp associates through seemingly legal but suspicious transactions. By December, Thomas had taken to following the brothers discreetly. His diary entries become increasingly paranoid, with frequent mentions of being watched. On December 21st, he wrote, "I believe they know of my observations. Morgan Earp sat across from me at the Oriental Saloon today, saying nothing, merely watching. His gaze held neither threat nor friendliness, only cold assessment. 3 days later, Thomas relocated his lodgings to a boarding house on the outskirts of town. He told the proprietor he had completed his research and would be returning east after the holidays. The diaries indicate Thomas never intended to leave. Instead, he began interviewing miners, particularly those who worked the night shift at the contention mine. From these discussions, he learned of sounds described as neither animal nor human, coming from an abandoned shaft approximately 2 miles outside of town. The miners refused to approach the area even during daylight hours. Local Apache workers wouldn't go within a mile of it, claiming the ground there was unclean. One miner, a man named Jeremiah Wilkes, told Thomas of an incident 6 months earlier when he and 2 companions had investigated the sounds out of curiosity. According to Wilkes, they found evidence of recent activity, fresh wagon tracks, discarded lantern oil canisters, and what appeared to be a trail of dark fluid leading into the shaft. As they prepared to descend, they were confronted by Morgan and Warren Earp, who claimed the mine was under investigation for silver theft. The miners were ordered to leave and never return. Wilkes told Thomas that one of his companions, who had argued with the Earps that night, disappeared 3 days later. The official explanation was that he had left for California, but he had abandoned all his possessions, including a week's unclaimed wages. Thomas's final diary entry is dated January 3, 1880. It reads simply, "I will investigate the shaft tonight. If what I suspect is true, this must be documented, regardless of consequence." The next 13 pages of the journal were torn out. When the diary resumes on January 17th, the handwriting is noticeably different, more hurried, less precise. The content shifts to mundane observations about mining operations and town development. Harold Zimmerman of the FBI's Document Division concluded that while the later entries were likely written by Thomas Hargrove, they showed significant neurological compromise, possibly due to trauma or extreme psychological distress. Most telling was Zimmerman's observation that certain words, specifically Earp, mine, and night, showed minute hesitations in penmanship, suggesting conditioned avoidance response. University records show that Thomas Hargrove returned to Boston in February 1880. No further mention is made of the Earps or the disappearances. A detailed analysis of the handwriting conducted in 1965 by Dr. He submitted a brief, unremarkable paper on Tombstone's economic development before resigning his position. Colleagues described him as profoundly changed, speaking little and avoiding social engagements. He died 3 months later of what was recorded as nervous exhaustion, a common diagnosis of the period for various conditions, including severe psychological distress. What makes Thomas's case particularly disturbing is a detail discovered in 1968 in church records from Trinity Church in Boston. Thomas, previously healthy and just 34 years old at the time of his death, was described by the attending physician as having aged dramatically, presenting as a man of 70 or more years. The physician noted Thomas's hair had turned completely white. His skin had developed a parchment-like quality, and he suffered from tremors and memory lapses. Most disturbing was the note that Thomas repeatedly drew the same symbol in the margins of books, a circle with a vertical line through it, which he would then frantically erase when noticed. The mystery might have remained buried had it not been for Edward Colton, a geology student who in 1906 was surveying abandoned mines around Tombstone. Descending into the shaft Thomas had mentioned, by then known locally as Earp's Folly, Colton discovered a sealed chamber approximately 200 feet below the surface. His field notes describe finding evidence of prolonged human habitation and unusual modifications to the natural cave structure. Most disturbing was his description of finding what appeared to be a journal made of bound human skin, containing names and dates. Colton removed this item, but reported the chamber otherwise undisturbed. Colton's detailed sketches of the chamber preserved in the University of Arizona archives, show a roughly circular room with 7 alcoves carved into the walls. In the center was a stone table or altar with deep channels cut into its surface, all leading to a central drain. Around this central feature were arranged 7 chairs, described as crudely fashioned but with evident care given to specific design elements. Each chair had restraints attached to the arms and legs. Colton noted that the restraints showed signs of frequent use and repair. The walls of the chamber were covered in what Colton described as a combination of recognizable Apache symbols and unknown markings reminiscent of European alchemical notation. He made careful copies of several sections, noting that the symbols appeared to radiate outward from a central point above the stone table. Later analysis by linguists suggested some symbols had roots in Bavarian folk magic traditions, while others resembled corrupted Apache healing symbols inverted to suggest harm rather than wellness. Colton's notes indicate he intended to turn the journal over to authorities in Tucson. He never arrived. His wagon was found abandoned on the trail, his equipment scattered, but no sign of violence. The journal was never recovered. Colton himself was eventually declared dead in absentia, though his body was never found. The university expedition that had sponsored his research officially attributed his disappearance to misadventure typical of the still wild territories. What wasn't included in the official report was testimony from a local rancher who claimed to have seen Colton on the day of his disappearance. According to a statement given to the county sheriff but subsequently removed from records, the rancher observed Colton's wagon being approached by 3 men on horseback, one of whom matched the description of Warren Earp, the youngest of the brothers who had largely avoided the spotlight focused on Wyatt and Virgil. The rancher, fearing involvement, did not intervene. When he passed the same spot hours later, the wagon was abandoned, as later discovered, but he reported seeing fresh tracks leading away from the trail toward the hills where the abandoned mine was located. By 1908, the Earp brothers had dispersed. Virgil had died in 1905, Morgan years earlier in 1882, officially from an assassin's bullet during the infamous feud with the Clanton family. Wyatt had moved to California, reinventing himself as a mining consultant and occasional consultant for early Western films. His reputation was undergoing rehabilitation, the violent aspects of his past recast as necessary frontier justice. What few people knew was that Warren Earp had not truly left Arizona. County tax records from 1901 to 1912 show property taxes paid on a remote ranch approximately 15 miles from Tombstone under the name W. Smith. Interviews conducted in 1967 with elderly residents of the area revealed that the property was understood locally to belong to Warren Earp, who was rarely seen in town, but periodically received visitors who arrived after dark and departed before dawn. The ranch house burned under mysterious circumstances in 1912, the same year that the abandoned mine collapsed. The timing of Warren's apparent departure from the region coincided with another disturbing incident. Records from Cochise County Hospital indicate that in July 1912, 3 cowboys from a neighboring ranch were admitted with identical symptoms: extreme lethargy, memory loss, and rapid physical deterioration. All 3 died within weeks. The attending physician noted that they appeared to have aged decades in days. Their blood was described as unusually thin and pale. All 3 had reportedly been hunting on land adjacent to Warren's property shortly before falling ill. The abandoned mine that had so disturbed Thomas and Colton collapsed in 1912, effectively sealing whatever remained inside. Local newspapers reported the collapse as a footnote, noting only that the troublesome old shaft finally closed itself. Within a few years, even the location became difficult to pinpoint as the landscape changed and memories faded. What wasn't reported was that seismic monitors at a mining company office in Bisbee recorded no earth movements on the day of the collapse. A mining engineer who examined the site reportedly told the Tombstone Epitaph that the collapse appeared deliberately engineered rather than natural. This statement was never published, and the engineer, Harold Mackenzie, left Arizona shortly thereafter. His correspondence with colleagues, discovered in 1965, mentioned pressure from certain parties to conclude my business in the territory with haste. The story might have ended there if not for Josephine Marcus, Wyatt Earp's common-law wife. Following Wyatt's death in 1929, Josephine became increasingly erratic, by turns fiercely protective of Wyatt's legacy and seemingly terrified of it. She burned many of his papers and attempted to control narratives about his life through intimidation of early biographers. In 1937, at age 76, she reportedly told a visiting journalist, "You don't understand what they did. The badge wasn't for law, it was for cover." The journalist dismissed this as the ramblings of an elderly widow. The interview was never published. What was less widely known was Josephine's peculiar behavior in her final years. Caregivers reported that she insisted on sleeping with the lights on and required all mirrors in her home to be covered. She refused to go outdoors after sunset and maintained an elaborate locking system on her bedroom door. According to her personal physician, Dr. Samuel Wiseman, Josephine suffered from extreme paranoia, centered on the belief that her deceased husband was attempting to visit her. Dr. Wiseman prescribed sedatives, but noted that Josephine refused to take them, claiming they would lower her defenses. Most disturbing were the nighttime disturbances reported by Josephine's neighbors. On at least 3 occasions between 1942 and 1944, police were called to her residence in response to screams. Each time, officers found Josephine alone, but hysterical, claiming that he was at the window. Officers found no evidence of intruders, but one report mentions finding unusual scratch marks on the exterior windowsill, as though made by extremely thin, sharp implements. After Josephine's death in 1944, a sealed package was discovered among her effects, addressed to the Smithsonian Institution with instructions that it remain unopened until 1967. When finally examined by curator Robert Halsey, it contained a silver badge, presumably Wyatt's from Tombstone, and a folded piece of paper containing 5 names and corresponding dates. All matched men reported missing in Tombstone between 1879 and 1881. The paper's reverse side bore a single sentence in what handwriting experts confirmed was Wyatt Earp's distinctive script. These weren't the only ones. Also included in the package, though not mentioned in the official Smithsonian inventory, was a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be human finger bones, each carved with identical symbols matching those Colton had sketched from the mine chamber. This information comes from Halsey's personal journal, discovered after his disappearance. The journal indicates Halsey removed these items before cataloging the collection, believing they required further private investigation. The Smithsonian, uncertain how to contextualize these items, quietly archived them. Halsey, however, became obsessed with uncovering the truth. His research led him to descendants of Nicholas Earp, Wyatt's father. Most refused to speak with him, but one elderly cousin in Illinois granted an interview in exchange for anonymity. According to Halsey's notes, the cousin revealed a family secret, that Nicholas had instructed his sons in what he called the old way, a method of gaining power through ritual sacrifice. The cousin claimed this practice had roots in perverted European folk traditions that Nicholas had learned during his time in Kentucky. The cousin, identified only as E.E. in Halsey's notes, claimed that Nicholas had been inducted into these practices by a German immigrant who had fled Bavaria following the collapse of an occult society there in the 1820s. The practice allegedly involved the extraction and consumption of specific elements of the human body believed to contain life essence. Practitioners reportedly gained enhanced strength, resistance to injury, and dramatically extended lifespans, but required regular replenishment to maintain these benefits. Most disturbing was the cousin's claim that the ritual required 7 practitioners, no more, no less, to maintain what was called the balance. This detail aligns disturbingly well with the 7 chairs Colton documented in the mine chamber. Nicholas Earp had 7 sons, though 2 died in childhood. The surviving 5, James, Virgil, Wyatt, Morgan, and Warren, would need 2 additional participants to complete the circle. Halsey traveled next to Tombstone, where the town had begun capitalizing on its frontier history through tourism. The sanitized version of the Earp legacy was firmly established. When Halsey attempted to locate records from the 1880s, he discovered that a suspicious fire in 1897 had destroyed many of the town's early documents. Convenient timing, as this occurred just as Wyatt was beginning efforts to reshape his public image. Undeterred, Halsey sought out elderly residents who might remember the original events. He found Matilda Grayson, 93, whose father had worked at the Oriental Saloon. Matilda recalled, "Papa wouldn't speak of it directly, but he warned us children never to be alone with any of the Earps. He said they had hungry eyes, not like normal men." She also mentioned overhearing her father tell her mother about the screaming from the hills that could sometimes be heard on still nights. Matilda also revealed a detail absent from historical accounts, that Doc Holliday, the Earps' infamous associate, had initially been terrified of the brothers. According to family stories passed down from her father, Holliday had witnessed something at the Earp residence that left him white as a sheet and shaking. Afterward, he attempted to leave town, but was persuaded to stay. Matilda's father believed Holliday had been coerced through threats or blackmail. Following this incident, Holliday was frequently seen with the Earps, but reportedly drank heavily and used laudanum, possibly to cope with what he had witnessed or been forced to participate in. Halsey's investigation next led him to the descendants of survivors from the Clanton family, the supposed villains of the OK Corral narrative. Joseph Clanton, great-nephew of Ike Clanton, provided Halsey with family papers suggesting the famous feud wasn't about cattle rustling or personal animosity as commonly believed. According to these documents, Ike had discovered unspeakable activities at a remote ranch connected to the Earps. The confrontation at the OK Corral wasn't a simple law enforcement action. It was an attempt to silence witnesses. The Clanton family papers, since lost in a house fire in 1975, reportedly contained a deposition Ike had prepared for territorial authorities, but never filed. In it, he described finding a hidden cellar at a ranch property nominally owned by John Swain, a known Earp associate. Inside were implements of restraint and surgery, along with documents detailing a process of extraction and preservation. Most disturbing was Ike's claim that he recognized personal effects belonging to 3 men who had disappeared from Tombstone earlier that year. Particularly disturbing was Joseph's claim that family lore held that Morgan Earp hadn't actually died in 1882. The public shooting was allegedly staged, with a transient murdered in Morgan's place. Joseph claimed his grandfather had spotted Morgan years later in Colorado, living under an assumed name. When confronted, Morgan allegedly said only, "Some bonds can't be broken even by death," before disappearing. This account aligns with a curious detail from Colorado territorial records. In 1888, a man named Mark Edwards purchased property near Telluride. Photographs from a town celebration in 1890 show a man bearing striking resemblance to Morgan Earp. More telling is that following a mining accident in 1891, where Edwards was reportedly crushed by falling rock, no body was ever recovered. The mine owner, when filing the accident report, noted that despite extensive searching, it was as though Edwards had simply vanished from within the earth itself. Halsey's research took an even darker turn when he discovered court records from Wichita, Kansas, where Wyatt had served as police officer before moving to Tombstone. The records detailed an unusual number of prisoners who died in custody during Earp's tenure, all officially attributed to fever or natural causes. More disturbing were the coroner's notes on 3 of these cases, indicating the bodies showed evidence of small, precise surgical incisions at the base of the skull and along the spine. These findings were never investigated further. The coroner, Dr. Matthew Lindstrom had made additional observations that were excluded from official reports, but preserved in his personal medical journal, now held in the Kansas Historical Society archives. He noted that the deceased prisoners, all drifters or petty criminals without family connections, showed signs of extreme parasitic consumption, unlike any disease process he recognized. The bodies exhibited rapid decomposition, with Lindstrom noting they aged decades within hours of death. Most disturbing was his observation that, despite the apparent blood loss, very little blood was actually found during examination, as though it had been systematically drained. Lindstrom's journal indicates he brought his concerns to the town marshal, who dismissed them and suggested the doctor was overworked. Shortly thereafter, Lindstrom began to receive late-night visits from Wyatt Earp, ostensibly to discuss prisoner health conditions. Lindstrom noted that these visits left him feeling inexplicably terrified, despite Earp's cordial demeanor. Within 2 months, Lindstrom resigned his position and relocated to St. Louis. His final journal entry regarding Tombstone reads simply, "May God forgive me for my silence, for I have glimpsed practices that can only be described as monstrous." By late 1968, Halsey's research had attracted unwanted attention. He reported being followed and receiving anonymous threatening letters. His apartment was broken into twice, though nothing of value was taken. Colleagues at the Smithsonian described him as increasingly paranoid, often checking windows and speaking in whispers. In December 1968, Halsey traveled to Prescott, Arizona, claiming to have located a witness with first-hand knowledge of the Earp's activities. He never returned. His vehicle was discovered abandoned at a roadside rest area, his research materials missing. After a cursory investigation, local authorities ruled his disappearance a probable suicide, noting his deteriorating mental condition. What wasn't included in the police report was testimony from a gas station attendant who saw Halsey's car on the night of his disappearance. According to a statement given to a local reporter, but never published, the attendant observed Halsey's vehicle being followed by a black sedan with government plates. When the reporter attempted to verify this information with state authorities, he was informed that no such vehicle was registered to any government agency in Arizona. The reporter's notes on the interview were discovered in 1982 among his effects following his death from heart failure at age 42. Halsey's replacement at the Smithsonian, Dr. Eleanor Pierce, attempted to locate his research files but found they had been removed from the archives. The badge and list of names that had initiated his investigation were also missing, with no record of their removal. When Pierce inquired further, she was informed by her supervisor that the matter was closed. The Smithsonian had no interest in pursuing unsubstantiated conspiracy theories about American folk heroes. Dr. Pierce, however, continued the investigation privately. Her personal diaries, discovered after her death in 1999, detail her efforts to track down individuals Halsey had interviewed. In most cases, she arrived to find they had recently died, moved without leaving forwarding addresses, or simply refused to speak with her. One entry from 1969 reads, "I am beginning to understand Halsey's paranoia. It is not paranoia when they are truly watching. I believe I am being followed, and my telephone makes strange clicking sounds during conversations." What forces are at work to bury this history so thoroughly? The story might have ended there, but in 1971, a fire gutted the small museum in Tombstone that housed various Earp memorabilia. Among the items destroyed was a collection of personal effects purportedly belonging to Doc Holliday, the Earp's infamous associate. The museum's curator, Martin Wells, died in the fire, officially ruled accidental due to faulty wiring. What wasn't reported was that Wells had recently contacted Dr. Pierce about unusual documents he'd discovered hidden in the lining of Holliday's leather medical bag. According to Pierce's personal diary, found after her death in 1999, Wells had described the documents as medical procedures of some kind, but like nothing I've ever seen. Diagrams of the human nervous system with annotations in Latin and what might be Apache symbols. The fire occurred the night before Pierce was scheduled to visit the museum. Fire investigators noted that the blaze appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, suggesting arson rather than an electrical fault. But this finding was omitted from the final report. More disturbing was the condition of Wells's remains, which, according to the coroner's initial notes, later amended, showed advanced desiccation inconsistent with fire damage alone. Pierce's diary entry following news of the fire reads, "They are eliminating witnesses and evidence. The pattern is clear now, but why such effort to conceal century-old crimes? Unless..." The entry trails off, continuing on the next page with only, "God help us if I'm right. They might still be alive." Perhaps most disturbing is what happened to the land where the abandoned mine, Earp's Folly, was located. In 1974, the property was purchased by Frontier Historical Foundation, a private organization dedicated to preserving the authentic history of the American West. Records indicate the foundation was established with funds from a trust created by Josie Earp before her death. Their first action was to cap the collapsed mine shaft with concrete and forbid any archaeological investigation of the site, citing safety concerns and respect for potentially unmarked graves. Further investigation into the Frontier Historical Foundation reveals troubling inconsistencies. Despite its purported mission of historical preservation, the organization conducted no other preservation activities beyond securing the mine site. Its board of directors listed 5 individuals, none of whom appeared in any other historical or academic contexts. Attempts by researchers to contact these individuals in the 1980s found that their listed addresses were either vacant properties or commercial mail drops. The foundation maintained a minimal paper presence, filing required tax documents, but conducting no public-facing activities. When questioned by local historians, the foundation's representative, who identified himself only as John, stated, "Some aspects of history are best left buried. The West was built on new beginnings, on leaving the past behind." The foundation maintained ownership of the property until 1982, when it was transferred to the federal government and incorporated into a military testing range, effectively placing it beyond the reach of civilian researchers. What wasn't widely reported was that in 1981, before the property transfer, a team of geologists from the University of Arizona conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area as part of a broader geological study. Their findings, published in an obscure academic journal, noted a significant anomaly beneath the concrete cap, a cavity approximately 60 feet in diameter at a depth of 200 feet. The team requested permission to investigate further, but was denied access by the foundation. The lead geologist, Dr. Karen Schiller, later reported that her research notes on the site were stolen from her office, and the university's copies of the radar data were corrupted in what was described as a storage failure. In 1987, author Gerald Montgomery began researching a comprehensive biography of the Earp brothers. His manuscript, nearly complete in 1989, reportedly contained a chapter titled "The Dark Territory: What Happened in the Mines." Montgomery's publisher, Westward Press, announced the book with considerable publicity, promoting it as a work that would forever change our understanding of frontier justice. 2 weeks before the scheduled publication, Montgomery's home in Santa Fe burned to the ground with him inside. The manuscript was destroyed, and no copies were ever recovered. Montgomery's research assistant, David Levine, later revealed that Montgomery had discovered connections between the Earp brothers and 7 other men who had served with Nicholas Earp during his time in Kentucky. All 7 eventually relocated to frontier territories where the Earps held influence. More disturbing was Montgomery's discovery that none of these men had death certificates or confirmed burial sites, despite historical records indicating they had died between 1875 and 1892. Montgomery had tracked property records showing that all 7 had transferred their assets to various Earp family members shortly before their reported deaths. The official investigation ruled the fire accidental, but Montgomery's editor, Susan Halpern, remained skeptical. In a 1990 interview with a small literary journal, she stated, "Jerry was being careful. He kept telling me, 'These men aren't really dead, not in the way that matters.' I thought he was speaking metaphorically about their legacy. Now, I'm not so sure." Halpern left publishing shortly after and declined all further interviews on the subject. What Halpern didn't reveal publicly was that Montgomery had sent her a package shortly before his death, with instructions to open it only if something happened to him. According to Dr. Pierce's diary, Halpern contacted her in 1991 about this package, which contained photocopies of pages from what appeared to be Doc Holliday's medical journal. The pages detailed a procedure for extracting what Holliday termed vital essence from living subjects, with notes indicating the process could extend life, but required regular renewal. The journal contained a list of names, 7 in total, with dates spanning 1880 to 1881, all matched men who had disappeared in Tombstone during that period. Halpern reportedly told Pierce that after reviewing the documents, she burned them, fearing for her safety. The autopsy report, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 2001, noted that despite the traumatic nature of her fall, Halpern's body contained anomalously low blood volume and showed accelerated decomposition inconsistent with time and environmental conditions. The final piece of this disturbing puzzle emerged in 1994 when construction workers renovating an old building in Colton, California, one of Wyatt Earp's residences, during his later years, discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. 3 weeks later, Halpern died in a hiking accident in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her body was found at the base of a cliff, the death ruled accidental. Inside was a tin box containing what appeared to be human teeth, each carefully wrapped in cloth with dates inscribed. Also in the box was a hand-drawn map of Tombstone with several locations marked with small X's. The construction foreman reported the find to local authorities, but before investigators arrived, unknown persons claiming to be from the Historical Society removed the items. When police followed up, no such collection was authorized, and the items were never recovered. What wasn't reported was that one of the construction workers had photographed the contents before they were taken. The photographs, shared with Dr. Pierce in 1995, showed that each cloth wrapping also contained a small paper slip with a name. 7 of the names matched those from Holliday's journal. More disturbing was the map, which showed 7 properties arranged in a rough circle around the mine site, each marked with the same symbol Colton had documented in the underground chamber, a circle bisected by a vertical line. Dr. Pierce's final diary entry, dated January 17, 1999, reads, "I've found him. After all these years, I've actually found him." The photograph leaves no doubt it's Warren Earp, unchanged since 1900. He's using the name William Stanton now. I've arranged to meet him tomorrow at his home outside Flagstaff. I'm both terrified and exhilarated. What questions does one ask a man who should have died a century ago? Pierce was found dead in her hotel room the next morning. The official cause was listed as heart failure, though the autopsy noted her body showed signs of extreme advanced age, inconsistent with her actual 58 years. Today, Tombstone thrives on tourism, with daily reenactments of the gunfight at the OK Corral. Visitors pose for photos with actors portraying Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, unaware of the darker history that may lie beneath the carefully constructed narrative. The Earp brothers are celebrated as flawed heroes of a mythologized American West, their violent tendencies contextualized as necessary responses to a lawless frontier. What remains unexplained are the continuing reports, as recently as 1963, of unusual sounds coming from the sealed mine shaft before it was capped, described variously as whispering, scratching, and something trying to get out. Local ranch hands refused to graze cattle near the area, claiming the animals became inexplicably agitated. Even after the concrete cap was installed, visitors reported a sensation of being watched when passing nearby. Military personnel stationed at the testing range have reported similar experiences. According to interviews conducted with former service members, certain areas of the range were designated off-limits without explanation. One former security officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that motion sensors around the former mine site would activate during night hours despite no visible presence. More disturbing was his claim that thermal imaging equipment would occasionally detect cold spots, moving in patterns that didn't match any known animal behavior. In 1998, a geological survey team conducting tests in the region reported unusual radiation readings near the site. When they attempted to investigate further, they were denied access by military authorities. The team leader later reported being visited by men claiming to be from the Department of Energy, who confiscated their equipment and data under national security provisions. No record of this incident appears in official department logs. Perhaps most telling is what happened to the land records for Cochise County. In 1958, a fire destroyed many of the original property documents, officially attributed to a lightning strike. What survived showed that between 1879 and 1882, the Earp brothers had quietly acquired mining claims forming a rough circle around Earp's Folly. None of these claims were ever worked for ore. According to one surviving document, Wyatt described the land as already yielding what we require. Satellite imagery of the area from 2002, obtained through FOIA requests by paranormal researchers and subsequently classified, reportedly showed an unusual thermal anomaly centered on the mine site. The imagery, briefly posted online before being removed, appeared to show a heat signature in a circular pattern approximately 60 feet in diameter, precisely matching the cavity detected by the University of Arizona geologists in 1981. We may never know what truly happened in Tombstone during those years when the Earp brothers held sway. What we can say with certainty is that history is written by survivors, and some stories are intentionally buried. The accepted narrative of frontier justice serves the national mythology, while the disappearances, the sealed mine, and the desperate efforts to contain information suggest something far more sinister. As Wyatt Earp himself reportedly told a journalist shortly before his death, history remembers what it's told to remember. The rest stays in the dark where it belongs. Yet questions persist. Why would multiple researchers investigating century-old events meet untimely ends? Why would government agencies secure an abandoned mine site with no known mineral value? And perhaps most disturbing, if Nicholas Earp did indeed teach his sons a method of extending life through ritual sacrifice, and if that ritual required 7 practitioners to maintain the balance. Who were the other 2 participants besides the 5 Earp brothers? Some researchers point to Doc Holliday and Bat Masterson as the likely candidates. Both were known associates of the Earps, both disappeared from public life for unexplained periods, and both exhibited behavior consistent with psychological trauma. Holliday's tuberculosis, which should have killed him years earlier, seemed to progress and regress in patterns that puzzled his physicians. Masterson, known for his fighting prowess, was reported by contemporaries to possess unnatural strength and reflexes for a man of his build. In 1954, a nursing home employee in Denver came forward with a strange account regarding a resident who had died there in 1940. The resident, admitted under the name John Holliday, had claimed during moments of delirium to be Doc Holliday, despite the historical Holliday having died in 1887. Staff dismissed this as confusion, but the employee noted that the man, despite his advanced age, showed unusual physical resilience and required unusually high doses of medication. Most disturbing was her claim that during the man's final hours, he spoke repeatedly about the circle beneath Tombstone and begged forgiveness for what we took from those men. The employee, Maria Vasquez, submitted a written account to the Colorado Historical Society. The document was subsequently removed from their archives, and when researchers attempted to contact Vasquez in 1968, they discovered she had died in a house fire 2 weeks after submitting her statement. Fire investigators noted that the blaze appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, a pattern matching the fires that destroyed Montgomery's manuscript and the Tombstone Museum. A similar account emerged in 1962 from a retirement community in Prescott, Arizona, where a resident named William Thompson reportedly confessed to a nurse that he was actually Bat Masterson. According to the nurse's statement, Thompson claimed Masterson had not died in 1921, as officially recorded, but had faked his death and assumed a new identity. Thompson allegedly described participating in rituals with the Earps that granted unnaturally long life, but required feeding on the essence of others. The nurse reported this to her supervisor, who contacted local authorities. By the time investigators arrived, Thompson had disappeared from the facility, leaving behind all his possessions. What lends credibility to these otherwise implausible accounts is their consistency across time and distance, from individuals who had no connection to each other. The details they describe, the circular chamber, the 7 participants, the extraction of essence, the unnaturally extended lives, align with physical evidence documented by Thomas Hargrove, Edward Colton, and later researchers. The trail grows cold after 2002 when Dr. Richard Bennett, a geologist who had been investigating the thermal anomaly at the mine site, disappeared while hiking in the Dragoon Mountains near Tombstone. His backpack was recovered, containing research notes that mentioned finding a small cave with symbols matching those Colton had documented nearly a century earlier. Bennett's body was never found, despite an extensive search. His colleagues reported that, in the weeks before his disappearance, Bennett had complained of being followed and had found his university office ransacked, though nothing of value had been taken. In 2005, the military testing range containing the mine site was redesignated as a restricted area under direct Department of Energy oversight, an unusual arrangement that bypassed normal Department of Defense protocols. Requests for information about activities at the site have been consistently denied under national security exemptions. A final disturbing piece of evidence emerged in 2014 when a home security camera in Flagstaff captured footage of a prowler attempting to enter the residence of Amanda Pierce, granddaughter of Dr. Eleanor Pierce. The footage, while grainy, shows a tall, thin man whose features bear striking resemblance to photographs of Warren Earp. More disturbing is that thermal imaging from the security system showed the intruder's body temperature to be significantly below normal human ranges. When police investigated, they found strange symbols carved into the home's doorframe, symbols matching those documented in the mine chamber. Amanda Pierce subsequently relocated without leaving a forwarding address. Attempts by researchers to contact her have been unsuccessful. Her final social media post, made shortly before her disappearance from public view, read simply, "Some legends never die, some men never die. Some hungers are never satisfied." The legend of the Earp brothers continues to evolve in popular culture, with countless films, television shows, and books celebrating their supposed heroism. The story of lawmen bringing order to a chaotic frontier appeals to our national mythology, the triumph of civilization over wilderness, of order over chaos. But beneath this sanitized narrative lurks a darker possibility, that the chaos of the frontier provided perfect cover for something monstrous, something that may continue to this day. For those seeking truth, the evidence, while circumstantial, points to disturbing possibilities. The pattern of disappearances around the Earps, the underground chamber with its ritual implements, the consistent accounts across decades from unrelated sources, the mysterious deaths and disappearances of researchers, and the governmental securing of an apparently insignificant mine site all suggest something beyond ordinary historical revision. As Dr. Eleanor Pierce wrote in her final diary entry, "The most terrifying possibility isn't that these men discovered some method of extending life through the suffering of others. It's that they may still walk among us, still hungry, still taking what they need from those who won't be missed." The frontier never ended. It just moved from geography to history, from open plains to shadowed institutions. And in those shadows, the Earps, or whatever they've become, may still hunt. Today, Tombstone celebrates its bloody history as entertainment for tourists. Visitors pose for photographs at the OK Corral, unaware that the famous gunfight may have been merely a footnote in a far darker narrative. They walk the streets where men disappeared without trace, passing buildings where desperate women once posted notices for missing husbands who would never return. They raise glasses in saloons where the Earp brothers once watched silently, selecting their next victims. And somewhere, perhaps, 7 men gather in circle, men who should have died a century ago or more, to perform rituals that sustain their unnatural existence. Men with familiar names who have faded into legend, allowing them to hide in plain sight. Men who learned long ago that the best place to conceal monstrous truth is behind heroic myth. Perhaps most chilling is the possibility that they continue to feed, not in the lawless frontier where disappearances could be attributed to the dangers of territorial life, but in our modern world. How many missing persons cases remain unsolved each year? How many drifters and loners vanish without anyone asking questions? And how many of those disappearances might be attributed to men with hungry eyes, not like normal men? For those inclined to dismiss this narrative as mere conspiracy theory or sensationalism, consider the evidence that remains unexplained. The sealed chamber documented by multiple witnesses, the consistent accounts of ritual activities, the pattern of researchers meeting untimely ends, the governmental securing of the site, and the recurring symbol, a circle bisected by a vertical line, found across decades and locations. Consider also the words reportedly found in Doc Holliday's medical bag. The frontier isn't a place, it's a hunger. And some hungers are never satisfied. Perhaps the true legacy of the Earp brothers isn't justice but appetite, an appetite that transformed them from men into something else, something that feeds in the shadows of American mythology. For those who still believe in the heroic Wyatt Earp of films and folklore, this account will seem impossible, even offensive. But history's shadows often hold its truths, while its spotlight illuminates only what we wish to see. And in the darkness beyond that light, sometimes things still move, still whisper, still wait to be discovered, or perhaps to discover us. The next time you watch a Western celebrating the legend of Wyatt Earp, perhaps pause to consider, what if the villains of Tombstone weren't the cowboys or the Clantons? What if the real monsters wore badges and dispensed not justice, but death? And what if they never truly died? As the sun sets over Tombstone today, tourists depart and the streets grow quiet. In that silence, if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear whispers from the sealed mine shaft, Earp's Folly, where something waits in darkness, something hungry, something patient, something that knows that legends never die. And perhaps neither do the men who inspired them.